Hey everyone, it's Arfan, and welcome back to the Successful Lead Generating Coaches Show. I have with me today a special guest. I have Dr. Dana Cowles here. He is an emergency medical physician, and he has a message that when I first heard this, I was like, wow. A lot of you know I've been in the mental health space. I've done quite a bit of work over the past 7, 8 years, and his perspective that he's offered on happiness was one of the things that just really stood out to me. So, Dr. Coles, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Arfan. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. So, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself. I want to let everyone know what we're going to be talking about today is something that every entrepreneur faces. At the very, very first day you become an entrepreneur, the very first thought that you had that you're going to be an entrepreneur, you've probably been hit with some fear and anxiety around it. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper beyond just the surface of this, and we're going to talk about overcoming fear and anxiety on your entrepreneurship journey. So, I'm gonna give you a chance. If you like, if you give us an introduction for yourself, tell us like how you like in your journey, what really led you to this work that you do.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Dr. Dana Cowles. I'm a board certified emergency physician. I've been working in the Florida and the New York markets, and I've been practicing for almost 20 years now. And I actually just
Love
did
it.
some math on it, and the number of shifts that I work, I almost see 5,000 patients a year. Going on
Wow,
20,000, it's now 100,000 impacts over the last 20 years, and that's an incredible thing for me.
that's amazing.
And I got started, initially when I was growing up, I was a kid that just had a ton of anxiety. And my father and my older brother used to combat that by pushing you into things. And,
Mm,
it looked to me like they were fearless. And that's what I wanted to do is go that fearless route. And so I tried to push myself to do things that were more aggressive, riding the bike down the hill without brakes or, doing whatever I could. And my brother liked to run across the roof of our house. So that was something that we did when we were young. And what I found is that it really compounded everything.
mm,
And so I tried to chase that path of fearlessness and learned quite a bit along the route. And
wow.
so when I was in college, I had the opportunity to get a free EMT license if I volunteered, and that was in southern Jamaica, Queens. And for an
Okay.
18-year-old kid that thought he knew something about life, that was a quite an eye opener.
So like these moments just kind of growing up with being into, having anxiety but then facing it or not even facing but being pushed into it. Was there a moment where you realized that in your life or career that this was really impacting your life and something had to be done differently?
Well, the biggest event that I had was when I was 12 years old, and we were on our way to church actually on a Sunday morning, and it was raining a little bit, and we were in a minivan, and there's three rows to this three, and I was in the middle row, and I can remember I was actually turned around on my knees backwards. It wasn't enforced so much about the seatbelts then,
Mm-hmm.
and I was reading the Sunday comics, and I could tell you the Calvin and Hobbes and the Far Side cartoons that I was actually looking at. And then all of a sudden there was some squealing and a lot of, I heard just some screaming all of a sudden. And there was a big impact and crush of metal. And then all
Mm,
of a sudden I was looking at the handle bar of there's a handle that opens a sliding door. And that thing just came and crushed me right in the ribs and knocked the wind straight out. And then all of a sudden I was seeing my younger sister who was in a car seat, and she was faced up at me where her hair was straight up and her arms are up in the air, and you could see I was on the roof of the car, and then kept going, and I landed back down on the floor. And I remember the first thing that I thought then was about the A team. And in every A team episode, a car had rolled over and flipped,
yeah.
you know. And so when we got to the bottom of that, there was a lot of sights and sounds, and things that were happening. That one of them was the windshield had crushed in the car, and the windshield wipers were pushing it down. The rain was coming in, and it had a very distinct smell to it.
Mm,
And I had an older sister who was actually cut all across the face. She had a big laceration there. And I was 12 years old at the time. And my dad was yelling, "Is everybody okay?" And my uncle was thrown out of the car. And my older sister leaned her face down and it sagged. And I could actually see the skull underneath it.
mm,
And, everything in my life changed right in that split second. And so when we you know, focused on everything from there. I remember feeling a number of things that were, my mother made me take off my shirt and put it on her face,
mm,
and I remember that that was the biggest thing was just, how could I give up my shirt? Why do I have to give up my shirt?
mm.
Your whole focus changes on to things that can even become petty at the time
Yeah.
because you get lost in that moment. And the one thing that I learned the most out of that moment was, remember this phrase, the only thing to fear is fear itself.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's the biggest lie in the world. It's garbage. And if you go to walk through southern Jamaica, Queens at 2 o'clock in the morning, tell me if the only thing you have to fear is fear.
Yeah.
And talk to the veterans that have been to Afghanistan or Iraq and ask them, is the only thing to fear fear. You
Hmm.
know, but what I learned right at that moment was the thing to really fear is helplessness. And
Hmm.
what you need to do in life is make sure that you're building up your skill set and build up your steam to be able to ward off helplessness. And that's what we do. That's why you go to the gym. That's why you go to school. That's why you get a degree. Everything in life that you're doing is you're trying to ward off helplessness.
Yeah.
And the one thing that becomes paralyzing is stopping or to not get started. So people will have plans or ambitions and things like that, and they don't start them up. But what you find is that navigation is so much easier than motivation.
Hmm.
So to be able to start up and even make mistakes or go the wrong way, you can navigate and pivot so much easier than getting that boulder started in the first place.
That's true. So true. So that's interesting. So really building up the skill sets that are needed. Can you speak a little bit more about that as far as like when you say the skill sets, what are when it comes to fear, anxiety, the entrepreneurship journey, or just tackling life in general, what are some of the skill sets that you've seen that just are underdeveloped and that we need to really start saying, hey, I need to be diligent about building up. Like you mentioned the gym and things, but like every single day or just top of awareness, what are these skill sets that we should be looking at?
So the first thing that I would say is that the medical service has done a huge disservice to people by treating fear and anxiety as a disease. A
Mm,
disease is something that a few people have in a broken part of the system. But fear and anxiety is something that everybody shares, and it's actually a survival instinct.
yeah.
And so it's a common human experience. It's not something that needs to be warded off. So the first and most important skill set is to understand that fear and anxiety is a tool. And it's
Mm,
something there that makes us pay attention. And the answer to that is, when you feel fear, you need to slow down and pay attention. The problem is that people will feel uncomfortable and they want to ward off an uncomfortable feeling. And so they
mm,
rush through things. So, like recently, my children have to do a yearly speech in front of the school that profiles a historical figure, and they get anxious. And
yeah.
so they all of a sudden they rush through it and they say da 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 da, and I say blah 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 blah. I didn't hear a word you said.
Yeah, it's all jumbled up.
But what you need to do is be able to slow down and pay attention. And what I learned in my path to fearlessness is that fearlessness is a fool's errand. You know,
Mm,
Fear is a tool to be able to be used, And to ward it off, the only people that are truly fearless are really thoughtless and careless.
Yeah.
So when I work in the emergency room, people will say to me, I'm really scared of working here. I'm nervous about working here. And my answer is good. Don't ever lose that, because that's
Hmm.
the part that keeps you on your toes and keeps moving. So the first skill set is being able to know and understand that and to be able to use that. And that's a very, very effective tool in life.
Yeah. I think
The
that's really
second
powerful
thing,
that you mentioned that. Nope, sorry to cut you off there. I think it's really powerful that you mentioned that though, because it's so true. Like if we're driving a car and there's a fearful situation, it's our instinct is that it kicks in to help us to get out of it, move out of it. But tackling everyday life, especially as like entrepreneurs, when there's fear and anxiety that can quietly show up and it can sometimes build up, and just speaking from my own experiences where it just builds up so much, and now it can put me in a position where I'm like rushing through a lot of things, like I just want to get it all down, and it becomes a practice and a mindfulness to be able to really say, okay, wait, slow down, like my brain, my body, it's my nervous system is dysregulated. It's trying to tell me something right now. And if I'm trying to grow, if I'm trying to sell, if I'm trying to be visible, rushing through it is not the answer. It's really not the answer. So
exactly.
it
And
makes a lot of sense.
unfortunately, when we're new at any given situation, that's what people want to do is, if they're feeling uncomfortable, get through it. And you'll see people that are starting in sales and they do that. I can tell people who are brand new at sales because they'll be rushing to the next statement. They know, what they want to say next, and they're rushing on through that instead of having that mindfulness of being able to slow down with the sales and actually communicating with the person and talking with them and understanding where they're coming from first. And that takes more of a methodical skill set than to just push your agenda on them.
Hmm. Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Please continue. So we got the first thing was that fear and anxiety are a tool, and it's a skill
Yes.
set to be able to slow down a bit. So yeah, wanna hear more of
The
this. I'm applying this to
second
my own life right now.
the second step is understanding a wobble, and sometimes we'll feel unsteady. And so if you feel that unsteadiness, that's actually the time to speed up. And I'm not talking about a large degree. It's just it keeps you moving and motivated. And you'll understand this if you've learned how to ride a bicycle or learned how to ride a motorcycle. So when you start out, I took a motorcycle course in Philadelphia, and it was interesting. And one of the first things was they give you a demonstration where this
Hmm.
guy takes a little Honda Rebel 150 and he revs it up really high, and then he lets it go across a parking lot with nobody on it,
Wow.
and it rides straight across, and then somebody else catches it on the other side, runs up and just jumps on it and stops it. And the speech is, we do this to show you that that motorcycle does not need you to ride it. You
Mm.
know, it will stay up. But when you feel that wobble or you feel very just unsteady, not the anxious or the fear, but unsteady, the answer is giving it a little acceleration. And so if you're leaning over too far on a bike, if you give it a little acceleration, it straightens up. Same with a bicycle. So life works a lot the same way too, where if you feel that wobble or leaning, give it a little bit of acceleration and it'll straighten up, and that keeps you moving. And any
Mm.
fear that you have is going to get amplified the more you stay stagnant. So if you're trying to find which direction that you're going without moving, it's very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. When you say wobble, how does one identify that in the midst of it? Because sometimes when we're in the middle of it, it can be somewhat tricky to know if like, hey, am I slow down, speed up, wobbling, falling? What's really going on?
Okay, so wobbling is more just an unsteadiness in your movement, so it's if you just feel off balance or off kilter, like things just aren't working right. That's a lot different than feeling that fear and anxiety. So that fear and anxiety is a pressure that is an understanding that something in your life is about to change.
Hmm.
And the one thing that I have found in talking to people is that the people who carry the most anxiety in life are very empathetic people. They know what's going on with the people around them, and they're almost holding a lot of that emotional baggage for other people because they want to make it right with them. They want to interact and cohesively work with them, and it brings on that anxiety. The
Yeah.
people that are very self involved, they're not going to have a lot of anxiety about what's going on around them with other people. So there's actually three types of fears. And the first type is a prospective fear. That's the what ifs. You know, if what if this is going to happen, or what if that happens? What if I can't make my payment next month? What if this, what if that? And the answer to the prospective fears is to make a plan. And more importantly than making a plan is you have to trust your plan. And we work through
Yeah.
this with people in the emergency department all the time, especially if they're having the what ifs of the biggest scenarios. What if someone is dying? What if this? What if, and that's the whole purpose behind a DNR, or I want to have full resuscitation or life support. You make a plan, but you got to trust the plan enough that if the what if happens, that you've got it fully enacted.
Hmm.
And so in people that are starting an entrepreneurial plan, that's why developing a business plan is so important. Because it covers these what ifs, so you don't have to cover it in the moment.
Yeah.
You know, the second type of fear is the contemporary fear, the what happens right at the moment. This is like this car accident that I was in, and then you're basically in for the ride. And the answer is slow down, pay attention, be methodical about what you're doing. And your body will even help you out with that because that's what happens in an adrenaline rush, right? Everything slows down. Your body is built and developed to be methodical in high
Hmm.
stress situations by slowing. The third is the retrospective fear, which is like PTSD, which very much centers on that idea of helplessness. So
Hmm.
if you have a retrospective fear, is I have a fear because something happened. Let's say you're a soldier at war and you lost your buddy and you had the skill set, you knew what to do, but something happened along the line that you felt helpless to actually save this other person, or anything that can happen that you feel helpless in the situation. And to be able to solve that one, you have to change the retrospective fear to a prospective fear. And what if it happens again? What am I going to do next time? And then you have to develop the plan and support the plan. And this happens all through your life, right? So when we went to school, how many fire drills did you do?
Oh my
You know,
gosh.
how many schools burned down? Next to
Yeah.
none. But we all have to do the fire drills. Why? Because it handles that prospective fear, what if, and it keeps
Hmm.
people in line with something to do. And so all these plans are developed through medicine. We have how to run a code, how to do ACLS scenarios. We've planned it, we've trained it, we develop it. What
Hmm.
if there's an MCI, a mass casualty incident, with lots of people who are hurt at the same time? There's a plan. This is what you have to do. What
Yeah.
if an active
Protocol.
shooter
Yes.
walks into the hospital at any given time? Here's the plan. Here's what you do. And
Yeah.
that seems to be, for me, one of the things that I find lacking in a lot of people who come to the emergency department, because I'll ask them what their fears are and what have they done to develop a plan. And
Hmm.
sometimes their plan is just call for help. And especially in a time of entrepreneurship or business development, that's not the most appropriate thing to do. It's about developing and expanding the resources.
Hmm. That's deep. I like that a lot. Can you tell me like, because you touched on a bit of this here, but from your perspective, and we know you're a doctor and work in the emergency medical. When when we're feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or frozen, like what's actually happening in the body? Like chemically, nervous system, etc., wherever it is, like what's actually happening in the body?
When you're feeling stuck, it's actually a disjointment. So there's something that I've talked with people about. To understand it a little bit better, you have to understand that there's actually three separate intelligences that people have. And they communicate with each other, but they're very, very distinct, right? One is your cognitive intelligence. So the cognitive intelligence is your facts, your figures, your history, what you know, and you train it. You have to develop it. The second is your physical body intelligence. And it's very different. There's so many things that are happening in your body that cognitively you're not fully aware of.
Hmm.
How much food is in there, how much you're digesting, your heartbeat, your heart rate, your breathing. That all goes on a lot of times without you, and you can influence it by communicating with it, but it's a very distinct intelligence. And if you ever do any powerlifting, one of the concepts is called loading the bar. And when you load the bar is basically you go to lift a very heavy weight and your mind sits there and says, I can lift this. I've lifted it 100 times. You lift it and you get injured,
Hmm.
right? But if you load the bar, which is you actually have to just push it up just a little bit, not even necessarily off the rack, but just a little bit, your body gets a sense of how heavy it is and it regroups different muscle fibers. And once it regroups those different muscle fibers to be able to handle that big load, you lift it, no problem, no injury, right? And so that's actually, people will call it muscle memory, things like that. There's times when I've been able to suture and, I can just stitch somebody up while having a full different conversation with somebody and not even looking at it. The hands are just going,
Yeah.
and it goes through that. And the third is spiritual intelligence. It's this awareness of what is right or wrong instinctively, right, that
Hmm.
everybody has a shared experience of, and it's not based in anything necessarily in reality, like the sense of justice or fairness.
Hmm.
If you are the passive observer that's going to be very objective and you look at life, you would say there is no fairness, there is no justice, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing fair in this world. But even a toddler understands fairness, and where did that information come from? So they did these experiments with these kids where they put three different plates, one in front of mom, one in front of dad, one in front of the kid. And then they would have a cover on them. And there would be one cookie for mom, two cookies in front of the kid, and none in front of dad. And so when they take the covers off of it, almost every time the kid would take one of the cookies and give it to the dad so that they were all equal. But if we have survival of the fittest, you would think that kid would hoard them all for themselves and say, I want them all, right? But
Right.
it doesn't work that way. So where does that sense of justice and fairness come from? That's that spiritual intelligence. So you have mind, you have body, you have spirit. Excuse me. So what you need to do is be able to put all three of those in alignment. And when you get into your period of most intense fear, if you're not using the fear as a tool to slow down and be methodical about it, when you do slow down, you're actually getting in connection with the mind, body, spirit all together. But when you try to rush through it, there's a disconnect. The body wants to do one thing. It's getting very anxious. It's speeding up. Your heart rate is going up. Your breathing is going up.
Hmm.
And a lot of times the cognitive is saying, I don't even understand what's going on. And we'll even get people that come to the emergency room that say, I've had an anxiety attack because something is happening inside of my body and I don't know what it is. And I don't know
Yeah.
what brought it on. So that's a disconnect between the two. And what you need to do is be able to get those fundamentally in alignment. And that gets rid of the paralysis part of it. And that is a good example when you're talking about that paralysis thing of the wobble that I was talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
while you cognitively want to slow down and be methodical, you got to give it a little acceleration on the body part of it and actually, be moving. And when you do that, um, you're going to be able to navigate easier because even if you make mistakes, you can pivot a lot easier than just getting it started. And one of the things that people do is they try to envision what they want and they want it perfect and they won't start because in their mind it's not perfect,
Yeah.
and my answer to that is it's going to fall apart anyway. So
Yeah.
it's easier to navigate and build based on the mistakes that you make rather than trying to make this grandiose start right from the jump.
I see that a lot too in the work I do because I help a lot of coaches with their launching and they want to have the landing page, registration pages look perfect and this and then like, hey, don't even worry about that. Like, we just get it going. We can adjust live. I'm telling you, the ideal clients are going to give us the feedback we actually need. We have no idea right now. We just want to make sure it looks good. And sure
Yeah.
enough, we run it and it's like, oh, we got to make some tweaks and changes. And it's like, yeah, Warren, don't spend that much time beforehand because you don't know exactly what you have to change until you actually have to go about doing it. So
Yeah,
that's
and that's
really,
where the frequently asked questions come from. You got to wait until they're frequently asked.
yeah, yeah, right. Try to make it up, chat GPT it or something,
Right,
but no, you gotta
exactly.
get the actual question to ask. So
Exactly.
this is what I'm hearing, and guys, for everyone listening right now, this is why I wanted Dr. Coles on here because he has such a unique perspective that we often don't like I don't hear anywhere. And like I said, I've been in this work for a while, life coaching, therapy, counseling, a number of different things. And when it comes to this topic of life and how we're living, and this could be applied to what we're doing right now, but even 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, as we do different things, as our journey continues to evolve, we also have to like this is something that we're going to take with us. So building up these skills is just such an amazing life skill, and it's something that I wish I would have learned when I was 12 years old, 13, 14 years old instead of learning now in my 30s. So I wanted to ask a question if for the audience here, for those who are resonating right now and are looking like, hey, okay, they've been their whole life just trying to manage fear or manage anxiety. So, is there a way to now go about like transforming and more or less having that relationship with it to where we're using it as a tool? And is there like a moment or a specific time in your life where you realize that, you're using this and embracing it as a tool, as a relationship? And was able to really transform how you just continue moving forward in life with these tools.
Yeah, it was when I started medical school, for sure. And so, even from the time I understood from when I was young that I just never ever wanted to feel helpless again. And that's what drove me on towards going the medical school route. But from that perspective, I wanted to be fearless, and I got a license and everything. I wanted to go skydiving. I wanted to drive motorcycles. I wanted to fly airplanes. I became a pilot. I did what I could because I was like, I'm going to be fearless, and
Hmm.
everything just terrified me even more. So the first thing is stop warding it off. Even though it's an uncomfortable feeling, our medical society has said if it's uncomfortable, it should go away,
Hmm.
and that's not the way we're built as people. That's not what we're supposed to understand. And one of the things, if I ask people what they want out of life, they tell me they want happiness, right? The happiness is the coup de grace. Disney is the happiest place on earth. I want my happily ever after.
Hmm.
And what people need to understand there is that was actually a marketing ploy that started in the 1800s because they changed the idea from a satisfaction of happiness to a euphoric happiness.
Hmm.
The little known secret is that came from Sigmund Freud, who was very big proponent of utilizing cocaine. So it's a super easy way to get euphoric happiness. But what marketers have learned, and Edward Bernays, who was, the chief marketer in American history, was Freud's nephew. They learned that happiness parts people with their money, and that's why every one of Disney's rides will end in a gift shop, because The happier we make you on the ride, the more likely you're going to spend the money right after.
Mm.
And we've been inundated with this so much in our marketing, buy our product, eat our food, drink our drink, wear our makeup, you're going to be happy. And so if I ask people what they want out of life, they tell me happiness. And what people really want and need out of life is security and affirmation. They need to know that things are going to be okay and that they're a good person in the process.
Mm.
And so with this push towards happiness, it reinforces this idea that anything uncomfortable needs to go. But I will tell you that you will not develop anything and you will not progress anywhere when you're comfortable. And so you have Damon John wrote the book The Power of Hungry, and those things that, if you get yourself into a position where you're uncomfortable, you're going to retain more, build more, develop more. And when I was in medical school, one of the things that I would do is if I failed a test or failed a project or whatever, and I had to go retackle it, the first thing I would do is turn the temperature either all the way hot or all the way cold in the room I was studying in. I would get rid of the padded seat and sit on something that was very rigid and make sure that I'm sitting upright, not lounging on a couch, and just make yourself very uncomfortable in that position. Your workload goes through the roof, but people
Interesting.
will tend to want to be happy. So they change all that for, comfort, and they want to be lounging, and that'll make you sleepier and less productive. And, there's all kinds of factors for it.
Mm.
But if you learn, so to speak, as they tell you in the military, just enjoy the suck, right? It's going to suck. So, get used to being comfortable in the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And if you can learn to not ward off these uncomfortable feelings, then they're significantly more useful right away. If you ask yourself, why am I anxious right now? And what can I do as I'm slowing down and being more methodical? What decisions do I need to make differently now? What are the potential things that are going to hit me? And what would I do if that situation were to happen? One of the things that I've done throughout my whole career, is I tell people always know your parachute, right? Always have your parachute. So I go on job interviews, even in the position that I'm in right now, and that's how I got into a travel job. Is I just interviewed for it, and so as you go and interview, the person's going to ask you, "Why do you want this job?" And I say, "Hey, I don't necessarily want it. I've got a great job, but I like to get to know people. I like to know what you're offering, what kind of work environment that you have. I'd like to keep you, in my contact list." And if you need me, right, and I'm talking you really need me, then we can talk about me coming over, but you got to show me that you need me, right?
Mm.
But in that regard, things can happen any given day, right? And I tell people out of the emergency room, yesterday was an entire lifetime away, right? So if something were to happen tomorrow and you lost your job, who would you call?
Mm.
What phone number would you dial? And if people don't know that, I would say then you don't know your parachute, right? And so as long as you have the parachute on your back, trust me, you'll fly a lot higher. If you
Yeah.
know, okay, if things go bad, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And then you stop worrying about those pitfalls of, what if this fails or that fails. And the other thing that I like to give people as a quote was from an old wrestling coach of mine, and he always used to tell me that life is not about your wins, right? Every toddler knows how to do a touchdown dance.
Mm.
Life is more about your losses and how you handle them. So he said, go out there and be good. If the other guy's good, you be better. If the other guy's better, you be the best. And if he's the best, you better get up there and shake his hand. And so if you have to, go out there and lose like a winner.
Powerful. And get that printer for my wall. I love that. That's awesome. Hey, today has been very rewarding and rich. I was really happy to have you on here. I've wanted you for a while, as you know, because this is really gold, and we could sit and we could talk for quite a while. And I do know before we wrap up here too, that you do also have a speech that's also online where you dive a little bit more into this, where you go into the happiness. And I think you break it down at a really great level to really which has allowed me to also, as I go about the world, I can see how this is manufactured in certain places. For those who know better, and for those of us who don't, who we fall for it, not in a victim way, but we just kind of fall for it because we're unaware of the psychology. If someone wanted to watch that speech in its fullness, where would they how would they get access to it? Give me the search criteria, or I can pop the
So
link too as well for everyone.
the easiest way to get into those videos and some of the other podcasts that I've done are through YouTube. I have my own channel through Dana Coles, and the latest TV show that I did is episode on there. And I also have a website, colesemergencyservices.com. If anybody's wanting to get in touch with me and discuss a little bit more about this fear and anxiety, and if they are interested in having me to come out and speak, that's a good way to get a hold of me. And I also do some coaching where we can sit and talk about some of these life plans and how to develop them, through a bare minimum basic structure, but also how to, functionally develop an effective plan when you're facing the fear and anxiety portion.
Mhm. Love that. So guys, I will drop those links in the show notes, and also if you're on the blog right now, those links will be at the bottom, so that way you can check out some of the content is deep and a lot more deeply than we discussed it today. But it's something that embracing this now, like I said, I wish I knew a lot of these things, a lot of these perspective and awareness, and how my body, how my mind, how my spirit is responding to fear and anxiety, because it would have allowed me to take bigger leaps and bigger jumps and always knowing that, I mean, the idea, the concept of parachute, even just really knowing that, if you think about it, how much more would you be willing to do just knowing that you have a parachute? And it really gives that, I think you mentioned the safety is one of those needs that we have. It really can reinforce that safety. So I love that. One, just a few other questions so we can wrap up today. I think
Yeah.
that a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, we can struggle to tell the difference between fear and intuition. What would you say to anyone right now who's probably struggling to tell the difference? How they could learn to discern between the two?
Between fear and intuition.
Yeah, just like between the fear, intuition, like what is it that I'm feeling that's actually fear, or what is it that's like my gut? My gut is actually telling me to do this or not do this, or speed
I
up, slow
apologize
down.
for that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
um, so if you talk about fear and anxiety as far as, things that are going to give you apprehension is going to be a lot different than intuition. Intuition itself is going to be a knowledge base of what I need to do, and it almost comes inherently. So when your spiritual side of you is talking to you, that's the, where did that thought come from, or just
Mhm.
having a knowledge base that you never knew that you had, those things are just coming from somewhere. And some people look at it like it's in your subconscious or it's whatever, but I've seen people do that with things that they've never heard before, that they've never seen before. Think about like a prodigy like a Beethoven that's just, can play. Where did it come from? How did that knowledge base hit them? That was something that they inherently just had, and the gift that they've got is not something that other people don't have. They just have a better awareness of it, so they have a better communication with their spiritual side than a lot of people do. And you'll find that a lot of the communication in between your mind, body, and spirit is all hindered by fear.
Mhm.
I'm afraid of where that's leading me, or I'm afraid of where that's going, and they'll sit there and stop and they don't want to do it. And I talk about this when I just did one of the shows out in LA. I started getting in with some people that are running abundant studios and things, and they're profiling people that are social impact warriors, and you talk about like when you go to the gym, there's always somebody that'll do your PR as a warm up, and the people that they're profiling are exactly that. They've done so many great things in life and they're really pushing it and crushing it. One of them was this young man who was warding off a dog bite for his sister, and he got his face bit and torn up, and he made the news quite a bit for it. He was 6 years old at the time, and he jumped in front of his sister for that. And they asked him why he did it, and he said, "Because if one of us had to die, I wanted it to be me."
Mm,
And that's not something that is inherent in evolutionary nature, right? We're survival of the
no.
fittest, right? And so we should be developing a situation where we actually protect ourselves. And he did the exact opposite at 6 years old. And that's not something that he watched around and learned. And, somebody said that. But in that moment, that inherent knowledge was there for him that that was the right thing to do. And so, from that perspective, if you're feeling things where you're just getting inundated with the what ifs, you'll feel that tension coming.
Hmm.
And I've worked 20 years in the emergency department. It has never left me. There's still certain chief complaints that will hit the board. One of them that really comes to mind is late stage pregnancy, right? And it hits the board, and you'll just get that feeling of fear and tension, right? You're like, oh, this could go really bad. Oh, am I going to have to deliver a baby now? Oh, and you'll still feel that. And again, what that means is you need to slow down and pay attention, right? So
Right.
you work through that and develop what your plan is. If you're worried about things, you're perseverating and you're saying, well, what if, that's when you make the plan. If it's happening in the moment, that's when it means just slow down and pay attention, right? So
Hmm.
if you are saying, I need to go forward and move, but I don't feel like I can get started, that's that fear that's starting, right? And you need to understand that everything in life comes at a cost, and you need to pay the cost or you're going to accrue interest, right?
Hmm.
And if you're not paying the cost or accruing interest, means someone is paying for it for you, and they will eventually get tired and stop. And so if you're not paying this cost by actually moving forward and doing it, you're going to build up inside. If you're trying to ward off the feeling, you're going to build up more inside. And then by the time it does hit, it's going to be a paranoia, right? It's going to
Hmm.
be a phobia. Those kind of things are because you let it build up over time, right? And didn't actually utilize it as a tool the way that it needs to be. And so you'll find that the more you use it as a tool rather than trying to ward it off, the more that it comes easily. It's a skill set like anything else. The more you practice it that way. But what I find is people have the wrong perspective because they've been told to ward off the uncomfortable.
Hmm. Yeah, that's powerful. What I'm hearing is like the more we can use the tool and deal with it when it comes up, instead of letting it pile up and build up, the the more we're going to be able to actively do this as we
Mm-hmm.
continue. And now we're not just like having a closet where we're just shoving a bunch of stuff in there and trying to ram it closed every time. Like it's empty. And anytime something comes up, we're able to address it faster. The response is not as impactful, and it can allow us to really navigate better rather than being in more moments where we're stuck and frozen, more moments where we're actually moving. And yeah, the wobble is going to be there, but we know when we need to speed up and we're able to navigate it. So I love all of that. Thanks, man. That's good for me. I don't know about anybody else who is listening right now, but everything that was said today was for me, and I receive it, and it's something that's going to be impactful in my life going forward. I'm always about personal development, always about improving and doing better and understanding leveraging and using all the emotions that we have that don't ever go away and we can make them go away, and avoiding them is not the best thing to do. So when it comes to fear and anxiety, this is one that pops up a lot in our culture, more so than we probably need, and just life in general. But we're in a time right now where a lot of comfort is around us, and it can be easy to want to do away with anything that feels uncomfortable. So I like the idea of embracing it and using it as a tool rather than trying to ward it all off. So last thing, you have the microphone. everyone that's listening right now, or just what's one last piece of advice or piece of wisdom that you'd like to leave us with today?
Number one thing is, we talked about people drive towards happiness. And the one thing that I want to focus on is that what people need is a security and affirmation. And so the message that I would send out to people is you're so important. You're so needed in what you do. And one of the biggest mistakes I feel that we made in COVID is well intentioned, but remember who they said was going to be working, is the essential workers.
Hmm.
Imagine telling 80 to 90% of your population that they were non-essential. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that was made. I hear people saying, I'm just this or I'm just that. And it's like
Hmm.
people don't pay you money because it's funny, right? You're pivotal, you're vital. Don't ever minimize the contribution that you make to people. And if I asked you, what is the opposite of happiness? Or what is the opposite of depression? People tell me happiness because of that marketing propaganda. And the
Hmm.
one thing that is the opposite of depression is actually purpose.
Hmm.
And so what I would like people to do is make sure that they focus on that purpose as more importantly. And for people who are going down the entrepreneurial route, they've already got that. That's the innate part in their spirit because not everybody can do that. And just by taking the step to do it, they've done something that 80, 90% of the population can't muster the courage to do. They've
Yeah.
already taken that leap. And so to do that, what they're doing is something that's pivotal in our society. And even if they have a company that doesn't work or, they move on to the next one, that spirit that grows inside of them, that's building and innovating and developing and making something new that other people aren't doing the same way, that in of itself is critical for the development that we have in our country and our society. That's what's made us great. So I really encourage everybody who's going down the entrepreneurial route. Like Shark Tank was the best thing to happen to our culture, and the fact that so
Love
many
Shark
more
Tank.
people are developing into it now because they see that golden ring that comes up from it as pivotal. So I applaud everybody who's doing it. I really encourage them, and I hope that instead of being happy in what they do on a day-to-day basis, they're taking that security and affirmation to know how pivotal what they are doing is.
Love that. Thank you so much. Dr. Coles, again, thank you for being here. For everyone listening, if you need to get in contact with Dr. Cole, so it's Coles Emergency Services, that's Cowles, correct?
Yes.
And don't forget to also just I will pop some of the videos in the description so you guys can also check out the just some of the longer talks about this because I think it's very impactful and is a bit different than what we normally hear some of the gurus say and or even their long-winded approach to say some things that may sound similar. But I love how you eloquently put things and also very make it very clear to understand and applicable in our lives. So thank you so much. And for everyone, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to share this with somebody that you think would be helpful for. Like, subscribe to the channel. And with that being said, we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye, everyone.